Today on JiK Labs, we're giving you an introduction to pivot tables. Let's get started. Now that you have Excel open and ready to go, you're going to see we have some JiK Labs sales data up on the screen. So what we want to do is we want to use a pivot table to analyze this data. I guess if you're watching this introduction video, your question is, what is a pivot table? Well, a pivot table is a powerful resource built into Microsoft Excel that allows you to summarize, analyze, and just dig down and review your data quickly and easily. So up on your home ribbon, you want to go up to Insert. And right here on the top left, we have Pivot Table. Before I go any further, I should mention that we are on Office 365 and it is 2022. Pivot tables are available on Microsoft 2013 and newer. So the process is pretty much the same, but if you have an older version, may vary slightly from what we're doing now. But insert pivot table and you click on the down drop and we want to say from table. We're going to click OK and it brings up a wizard for us. So let's take a look at that. And we are selecting a pivot table range. Since we were on the tab and selected within the confines of our data, it selected it for us. A2 to G83. You have to have headers in your data, which we do, and we're going to say, where do we want to make the pivot table? We could say an existing sheet and put it right to the right of our data. You don't really want to do that unless you're just playing around with it, because 9 times out of 10, the reason you're making a pivot table is because you have a lot of data to analyze. So you want to start with a nice clean sheet so that you can look at your data. So we're going to hit new sheet and we're going to click OK. So we come in here and now we have down below sheet 1. And on the right hand side, you're going to see we have some pivot table fields. So the question is, what do we want to do? We know for a fact on our original data, we have sales data by salesperson. So why don't we find out the total sales per each salesperson? That's a good way to start. So we'll go back to sheet 1 and we're going to select salesperson. And we have Alice, Jack, Larry, Sophia, and Robert. So now that we have our salespeople, we need to find the sum of our sales. So we're going to come over to sales amount and we're going to click and drag that down the values. It has defaulted to the sum of sales amount, as we can see in the lower right hand corner. But see how it is just a general format. If we come up to our home ribbon, select column B and put it as dollars, we are good to go. But you would think not, because I'll show you here in a second. Also, I want to show you, I clicked outside the pivot table and our right hand columns have disappeared with our pivot table fields. Don't worry, all you have to do is click back into your pivot table and that will show back up for you. So no need to panic there. So let's come in here and add in cost as a value. You see how we added in cost? Immediately, it has reformatted itself back to like a general format. So let's go back a step. We could hit Control Z, but what we want to do is remove the cost field. So we can either come up here and uncheck it, or we can click and drag it to the spreadsheet and you'll see sum of cost with a little X saying that it's going to be removed. So we'll go ahead and do that. Now, let's just say for some reason, for the sum of sales, we had it defaulted to count. Sometimes it may do that. So you need to change the function in which the pivot table is doing. So you're going to come over to the field values. Right now, sum of sales, there's a down drop arrow. You're going to click on that. And at the bottom, you're going to select value field settings. And right here is where you're going to be able to select sum, count, average, so on and so forth. But sum is correct because we want the sum of the sales of all of our salespeople. So we're going to leave it at sum, but we want to click on number format. And it's going to bring up a window that you're familiar with, which is your format cells. We're going to come down and just select currency, and we're going to hit the one that we want and select OK. Again, we'll select OK here, and we'll be back to our pivot table. And now we can see that it has formatted. Now let's add in cost again. We're going to check the cost button and we can see since we formatted the sum of sales in the values field rather than coming up to our home ribbon and selecting the formatting that way, it stays fixed. That's a little trick and tip to make your life a little bit easier if you are in fact formatting your data in your pivot table. You'll spend a lot of time reformatting and reformatting and reformatting every time you make a change because it will reset itself. So again, to get rid of cost, we're just going to uncheck that box. So this pivot table is the summary of all of our data in A2 to G83. And we go back to here. Once again, we can rename this. Let's rename this to JiK PT for pivot table. So let's come back in again and let's click and drag sales down in there again. So now on the lower right, you're going to see sum of sales amount and sum of sales amount too, because it is in here twice. But let's just say we want to know how many sales each salesperson made. Well, honestly, we could use invoice number and count them that way, but I wanted to show you that you can put the same field back into your data more than once. So what we're going to do now is we're going to come into field value settings, and opposed to sum, we're going to say count, and we're going to hit OK. We'll come back to our pivot table and we'll see that Alice had 24 sales, Robert had 24 sales, so on and so forth. And on the lower right hand side where it said sum of sales amount to, it now says count of sales amount to. Also, let's say in our example now, we have the sum and the count of sales amount. Well, I want count to be before sales. So how do I do that? I can't cut and paste, but on the right hand side, I can select sales amount and drag that below count. And now you can see that they're reordered. Also, in our rows column, by salesperson, we can select who we want to see. Right now it's on select all, but let's just check select all and only show Robert sales, and that would update for us as well. But if you hit that auto filter and say select all again, all of your data is back. That is just another tool built into the pivot table to make your life a little bit easier as you're trying to dig down into your data and make some sense of it. Well, thank you for joining us today on JiK Labs, where we've given you a very brief and quick introduction into the pivot table. Our best recommendation is use some data, play with it, and as always, we're going to put this data on our shared drive and look at the comments down below so that you can practice, because the best thing you can do with the pivot table is practice. You're going to make some errors. It's not going to look right for you, but if you keep working at it, you're going to become more and more proficient. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you all next week when we dive a little bit deeper into the pivot table. Thanks again. We have this drop down.